don't know if you guys saw University Challenge, but there was a lot of consternation on Twitter and a bit on Facebook, partly because the two teams were all male, and I think aside from one of them, all kind of young white male. And I state categorically, it's not those players' fault that they got selected. It's not. None of this is their fault. And then there were a couple of questions, one on series Atlanta, another on Empire, and then there was a question about three actors, John Boyega, Letitia Wright, and Daniel Kaluuya. And none of them could even hazard a guess when presented with the things that they've been in, like one of the biggest films of all time in Black Panther, and one of the biggest franchises of all time in Star Wars. And again, I don't blame those players if things are outside of their cultural frame of reference, because we all have a cultural frame of reference. But I do think if those teams were more diverse, those questions wouldn't have gone unanswered. And I also think if University Challenge and other shows routinely had questions about Black culture or other kind of subject matter that is not commonly asked about, those teams would start prepping it in the same way that they prepare to answer classical music questions or literature questions. If 25 to 50 points in a University Challenge episode are going to be on, a particular topic, they prep. These good teams prep. And I think, for me, there's a challenge there for TV Land and for University Challenge and for other shows that.
And I think the general perception of general knowledge. I think I had this conversation in the Facebook group. So someone had set a good quiz, and there were two questions. One was on Boudica, and one was on Mary Stopes. And someone came back and said, I have never heard of Mary Stopes. I don't think this is a fair pair. And their reasoning was, in English primary education, Boudica comes up in Roman history. Whereas I came back and I said, okay, look, the question was framed around the 100 Greatest Britons. So I would say both those women, you could say a fair general knowledge. But also once you got to, in my case, which is a long time ago now, but when I did GCSE history, there was a whole thing about women's rights. And it kind of led to this discussion. And this was admittedly very focused on women, but you can say the same about ethnic minorities as well, which is general knowledge is you learn about the white males. So that's seen as the standard bearer of what general knowledge is. So of course these young white men are going to go, my general knowledge is great because they've been learning about white men. That's what society has told them to keep in the back of their head. It is a bit scary that these young men hadn't seen Black Panther, and these are not actors that are outside the canon, not super niche. These are all kind of mainstream series. But you're right, if you're going in and you watch previous University Challenge episodes, it's not going to occur to you to look at that kind of research because it just doesn't really come up in quizzing in general, really. So it's about diversifying what general knowledge is.
Yes.
And I get quite slightly defensive because I don't know if it's an age thing, but it's very interesting when older quizzes usually say, oh, I don't want to know about the Kardashians. If the Kardashians are going to come up in a quiz, just find out what the names of the main ones are and go from there. It will all sink in. It's not that complicated. If you can learn the names of historical figures, you can learn the names of these 6, 7, I'm not even sure, 6, 7 women. It's there's a lot of things that are not necessarily of your interest. But if you're a serious quizzer, they have to be in your orbit because it might come up. And it might be the difference between winning and losing a game.
I think it's one of those things. It's like these things have such deep roots, don't they? So I mean, it's when I worked on University Challenge, we'd often have teams, and you'd look through their their profiles. You'd sort of look through their application forms, and you go man. And sometimes it'd go, oh, we've got a woman. Oh, she's the reserve. Great. And we would often talk to teams about this, and invariably they would be as embarrassed as you might expect or maybe hope that they are. And it's just that idea of it's getting people for whom maybe general knowledge isn't considered the done thing in the first place to show up. So getting women and minority people, because general knowledge, I think, has been such a white man staple for so long. There is that sort of explicit and implicit suggestion that quizzing isn't for them. So then, you know, if you do get a handful of women or people of color showing up, you then have a conundrum, because then, you know, like what do you, I mean, if only 2 women show up to a trial, you know, do you put one of them on no matter what their score is, or, you know? And so this is, that is a big problem in and of itself, is just that, like, the roots go so deep of this in terms of, you know, I remember there's a friend of mine who has sort of dabbled in quizzing a bit, but as a PhD student, and she guess it goes right back to, you know, to what we call in Ireland sort of junior infants. It's like sort of like year 1 kind of kindergarten, where it's like boys are just generally encouraged to put their hands up more than we girls are. So it's like, you know, these things have big roots, and that is one of the big problems, is trying to sort of shift, you know, a generation or 2 at very least of attitudes and culture, and then trying to sort of bring everything up to speed. It's a real challenge. I suppose the other thing then, though, about the case of, you know, not knowing Atlanta or not knowing Daniel Kaluuya, is, I suppose it's because you know, the likes of City University Challenge has also maybe attracted a certain kind of student, and, you know, it's often like Twitter tends to go ablaze when they play something like, you know, Arctic Monkeys or, you know, Kate Bush or something, and nobody has the faintest idea who it is. You know, but, you know, they play a note of Sibelius and they're on it, you know. So I suppose there's that. But that all comes into that idea of, and that's even what happened on shows like Millionaire or maybe The Chase or whatever. It's that idea of, you know, you'll notice that you won't see very much what would be called lowbrow, sure, for hard questions, because there's just some sort of weird bias there, I think, where it's like, you know, having a popular culture question, say, is £1 million question on Millionaire or $500,000 or whatever, is somehow not worthy. So I think there's a couple of things to be done on that front as well. It's that idea of a hard question about, like you say, Chloe or Kim or Courtney is just as valid as a question about one of the 5 good emperors or something, you know?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get people out of that frame of mind. Even entertainment producers really struggle. It's like, well, if we're going to be giving away big money, if it's meant to be a hard question, then it should be on a hard topic.
Yeah.
That plays into part of it as well. So
it's so subjective.
It's so many different fears that need to go up all at once, which is so much of the problem.
I mean, the fundamental problem is systemic, isn't it? It is quizzes built on a certain culture or certain cultures, both sort of pub quizzing and academic quizzing, and they've been populated by certain demographic groups and the questions are written by certain demographic groups and they're answered, and, you know, those people keep expecting that sort of stuff, and very often they'll resist canon expansion because some of them music stopped when the Beatles split up, so anything after that is out of order. And I think quiz can only really move forward as a sport, and I know my esteemed producer questions the there you go. So it can only move on and really reach its potential if it basically says everything is up for grabs. Music per se, popular music per se, is up for grabs, and you don't have to have a guitar, and you don't have to have gone to Charterhouse and be in Genesis or whatever. You know, whatever your background is, even if you record it in your bedroom, you know, if it's a hit, if it's noteworthy, it's there to be asked about, and people accepting that. That's the point at which quiz will really mature. But at the moment, the canon, just all we can do is try and expand it. Is when the likes of us are setting quizzes like we've done for QLL Friendlies, is set quizzes where we're asking about people and topics that don't normally get asked about. And Gavigan sets where every answer line or every question is about women. We've set 2 quizzes where where neither of the quizzes has had a white person in them. So, you know, it's all, you know, because these people don't get asked about. But as soon as they start getting asked about, then people think, I've got to know about that. And then we're opening the door. And I think it's, you know, I don't blame either of those teams on University Challenge, because, you know, they were well-picked teams for the questions that get asked on University Challenge. The issue is University Challenge should be asking a broader topic, range of questions, which would encourage perhaps a different approach on team selection, I think.
I think over the years, there's definitely been a sort of a very conscious case to make that more the case. And I think, and Tom Benson, who is a friend of mine and is the editor of the questions, has been on record. I think it was on the New Statesman, in terms of, you know, he definitely tries to sort of get more and more of that sort of canon expansion in. And I suppose it's one of those key things is that if you can ask about a female painter, then why not do it? You know, or if you can ask about, you know, actors of color, why wouldn't you do that rather than ask about, you know, Brad Pitt or Chris Evans or something? Like, why wouldn't you do that? So I think it's yeah. I mean, there's obviously still lots of way to go in that. But I think certainly if you kind of if you take the questions apart and you did an analysis of what they were like in the year 2000 or 2010 versus now, I think you would see a good difference. But there are certainly teams out there that, you know, do pour over that with a fine tooth comb. To be fair, I don't necessarily think the team in question this week were as prepared as some of like the big winners, like the Imperials, you know, of last year, or Glanville and Keys of a couple of years ago. Because, you know, there were a couple of flag questions that they sort of dropped and things like that as well. And so I sort of felt like maybe they were, you know, happy Corinthians and more power to them, or maybe they were just nervous or whatever else. But I think I suppose the thing about it is that it's important that people know these things without phoning up as well, you know. So it's just an intrinsically good thing that people know who Daniel Kaluuya is, or if they're aware of Empire. Like, these are good things to know.
And of course, the significance of Kaluuya, Letitia Wright, and Boyega was that they'd all won the BAFTA Rising Star Award, so they were all kind of notable in that regard. And yet, I reckon if you were to ask about Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man, who also won the BAFTA Rising Star Award, I reckon there'd be more awareness of him. And I think that's because the mainstream doesn't have a problem with asking about Rupert Grint, a minor actor in a big franchise. But if that minor actor in a big franchise happens to be black, then it's deemed harder for some reason. And I think, yeah, we've got to kind of break this somehow. And I do accept, actually, the fact that University Challenge was asking these questions does show that they're trying to do something about it. But there's a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think those questions were general knowledge. I think the fact people on Twitter were going, well, I could answer that, why can't these clever young men do it? Shows that actually those people have come into the mainstream, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be asking questions. It's not that it's a difficult subject. Just for those young men, it just kind of, as I said, it might have been nerves, it might have been a case of they haven't seen Black Panther, they don't watch Star Wars, and it just kind of went by them. But
I mean, the day a quizzer doesn't watch Star Wars,
as I was saying, it was acid, but yeah, it's, I don't know. I said, hopefully it was nerves. Hopefully they're not. I think the reason people were kind of so stressed about it was, had it been a different quiz show with older people, you might have let them off, and that again isn't fair to do. I think there's still an argument that you shouldn't have, but you're kind of thinking, this is the new generation. We're kind of, you know, these are young woke people. Why don't they know these things? And you're now kind of worried that actually all the stuff, particularly the last few months with kind of Black Lives Matter and all these things, that people have really gone, oh, actually we need to look at society and what we're doing. It's slightly concerning that you've got groups of young people going, no, I don't know who those people are. And it looks like they don't know who those people are because they're black. And they probably just don't know who they are because that's not a level of culture they're interested in, or, brain freeze on the day. So,
Well, one thing I find notable about that set, as far as I'm aware anyway, is that it didn't actually bring any attention to the fact that all those actors were black. which I think is a good. I mean, it's a good framing as well. It's that idea because I think there are people who are more than willing to be kind of like wield a torch against wokeness and all that sort of thing. So the idea that it was framed in just a way of like, here are 3 very successful actors, very distinguished award, and nothing further is commented on it, is a good way to go down as well.
I agree, because you wouldn't say which white actor.
Yes.
That never happens. So so I do. They stand on their body of work and on their successes, and judged by the content of the character, not by the color of the skin, yada yada yada, as Martin Luther King would say. And I think that was quite right. And I think, so in that context, they probably weren't thinking about color at all. But then, I don't know whether that in itself is a problem. So I don't know. This is a difficult situation, really. I think to get into the minds of people who are in a studio, because I've been in there. Shanine's been in there. Paddy, I know you've done all sorts of TV. Sometimes when the lights are on you, you forget your own name.
Well, you've been up since 6:30 in the morning.
I've been 15 to 1. It was like picked up at 6 o'clock, in studio about 6:30. I don't think I filmed my first episode till 1:30 in the afternoon. And then my second one I finished at 8:30. I was shattered.
Yeah. There's not a room you can just nap in for that time and be like, I'm here, just come and get me when you're ready.
Yeah.
So and no one sees that side. I don't know what time they drag those poor young men out for University Challenge. And if they're students, they're not getting up before 12. So it's going to be a shock to the system. But it's an interesting way to go. And I think more sort of, particularly television game shows, because I think for most people it's fair to say that's their experience of quizzing, particularly if they're children watching it and going, oh, I can answer those, I'm quite clever. They're not going to be going to the local pub quiz. They're going to be just watching, Pointless in the afternoon after school and seeing what knowledge you kind of need to have or what you already have. That's kind of the parameter, and that's why it's so important for television, I think, to get it right.
I mean, I don't think there's any problem with University Challenge being an elite show, as it were. The idea that it's a show, that asks very hard questions of people. But certainly the idea that Frederick Douglass wouldn't be asked about. Frederick Douglass would be asked about now, whereas it would have been quite a niche thing to ask maybe when Jeremy Paxman started his tenure. I suppose one of the things as well is that the fact that, and talking about that idea of all these things having really deep roots. And, and that idea of, a tryout for University Challenge being 90% male because of lots of sort of educational barriers put in front of people that aren't, young and white. The same thing happens to the fact that you're able now to ask questions about Daniel Kaluuya, John Boyega, Tisha Wright. The idea, that when University Challenge, this iteration started in 1994, the prominence of young black actors was not so great either. So it's that idea that sort of society, kind of creates more opportunities for people that would have been denied them or that were headed off at the pass as well. So I suppose it's significant in that regard, I suppose, is that, when you consider just how much society and attitudes have changed since the University Challenge went on to BBC Two. It's that idea of, the amount of black actors that they could have asked about in 1984 would have been quite scant, and for all sorts of, like you say, Gareth, systemic reasons.
So thanks, Shanine. Thanks, Paddy. We'll convene again this time next month to look back on what's happening quiz in October. And if anybody's watching and you've got something that you think we should be looking at or talking about, then email allthingsquiz@gmail.com. We'll add it to the list and we will talk crap about it. So please get in touch and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.